What is going on, everybody? Obviously, this is the moment for everybody to make sure that everything's sounding solid. Technical issues are, filtered out. But we're about to start the podcast with me and Aaron Leming as what a doozy of a game, right, Aaron?
Yeah, it was as much of an emotional roller coaster as you could possibly have, considering that the game meant absolutely nothing for either team.
Yep.
So,
I mean, it's that simple, right? Before we get started, Aaron, do you think Zimmer stays or goes?
I think he goes. Dude, I can't. So that was the one thing that really irritated me in this game. Like, Justin Jefferson was 21 yards away. The game is over. Just do it. Just do it, man. Like, I was even screaming at the TV. It's like, just let it happen, man. Like, it's not like Matt Nagy. Who cares? Even if Matt Nagy's upset about it, he's going to be the offensive coordinator or quarterback coach somewhere next year. Who cares?
Right.
But that's just, as we've seen, man. Like, that's just, we've seen it with Matt Nagy. We've seen it with Mike Zimmer. They're going to go out on their own terms regardless. And, yeah, I mean, arguably, like, Minnesota should have been in the playoffs the last 2 years, in my opinion. I think they've had a better roster than the Bears the last two seasons. And yet, I mean, you've seen the results. So, yeah, I think Zimmer's gone, and I think it's justified at this point.
I feel like they're that classic team, Aaron, where half of the football world is going to pin it on Kirk Cousins, and that's probably not wholly fair. And the other half is going to pin it on Mike Zimmer, and that's probably not wholly fair. But everybody looks at the roster in general and is like, they're only 8-9. Like, you got Justin Jefferson. You've got, granted, the offensive line's not phenomenal, but you've got clear defensive pieces to work with. You've got Dalvin Cook on your roster, and, not that bad a quarterback. And, man, they just find a way to lose. It's funny because we could probably do this whole podcast, Aaron, never saying a name about either team, and we could talk about the Vikings the whole time, and Bears fans would be like, yes, fire that coach. Yes, underperforming we're underperforming for our best wide receiver. Yes, use our running back more. It's just all the same, right?
So let me ask you this. So do you think, assuming that Mike Zimmer is fired, because, I mean, that's going to be the talk of everything the next few weeks is head coaching and maybe GM, do you think the Vikings job is better or the Bears job is better?
So this, Aaron, is where I think the complicated answer comes down to how insightful is the rest of the league, right? If it was me, and I'm a huge believer in Justin Fields, the Bears' job is better because they have a quarterback and you can build from there, right?
Yeah.
I think everybody feels like, at least if you're positive enough of a person, because all I've ever heard, Aaron, is that negative people are not cut out to be head coaches in the NFL. So if you're a positive and jovial enough person to take an NFL job, you got to think that you could take a young quarterback and build a team around them easier than doing the opposite, right? But I get what you mean. I mean, especially given just... does it feel like there's this cloud of murkiness around Chicago right now to you, where partially with the owner situation, but partially with how Justin Fields ended up missing the last, 4 or 5 games due to injury and just everything that surrounds it, there's this layer of, oh yeah, but you have to cut through that in Chicago, that I wonder if it's as palpable for potential, like, candidates as it is for us fans.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, man. I mean, obviously, there's only a finite amount of jobs in the NFL, especially head coaching. And I think what's bothering me the most is we went in the last week or two, like we've known Matt Nagy is going to be fired for a while, but we went in the last week or two thinking like, okay, there's not that many jobs opening, 4, maybe 5, and all of a sudden you start watching the pregame shows this morning, and it's like Matt Rule may not be guaranteed to come back, David Coley with the Texans may not be guaranteed to come back, and all of a sudden it goes from 4 or 5 jobs to potentially that average is 7 or 8 again. So it's like, all right, man. I mean, I think, and I actually wrote this. I don't know when it's coming out in one of the Windy City Gridiron things that I do, and I wrote this today. Is that I think that the Bears are going to be shopping in a lot of their own league, if that makes any sense. Just because obviously you have Jacksonville and they're in a very similar situation, but there's not a lot of other teams in a similar situation that they have that young quarterback that they need to surround with offensive talent or the right guy, versus a team like Denver where it just feels like Dan Quinn is going to be the hire there, right? It just feels like there's, even with Las Vegas, they're going to go with another big name. They're going to go with somebody that they know. Like, I don't – and then you start looking at some of these other openings. Who the hell would want to take Houston at this point?
Yep.
Like Houston, like how do you hire? And that's my issue is I never thought David Coley. I didn't even know that David Coley was
Like a
that he was
potential
even
fire
yeah.
candidate.
Well, not even that a viable hiring candidate for the last year. You bring him in, you hand him the worst roster in the league, he overperforms, and you're going to fire him after a year. I don't know,
It's
man. Like this,
weird.
but who knows? Again, as we've seen, there's a lot of things that fly around. Some of it doesn't end up coming true. There's always surprises. I think, regardless, at least for me, this isn't quite as good of a hiring cycle as it normally is. So it's
Sure.
going to be interesting to see how it goes. But I think that the Bears will have plenty of pull in terms of who they want versus who they get. I don't think it's going to be the issue. I think it's going to be who Bears fans want versus who the Bears actually land.
Right.
I think that's going to be the bigger issue.
So speaking of Aaron, before I'll ask you this question, then we'll start the show because this just came to me and it's really interesting, right? So the Lions are playing hard, and at the very least, they're giving it everything that they have on the field, and I feel like overperforming with also not a very good roster. Maybe not overperforming. They didn't perform great, but they're at least their wins. It feels like they're beating teams that weren't at their level. They're punching up, right? So pretend for a second that Dan Campbell is an it hire. Like, let's throw out the window the fact that he called 2 timeouts in a row and horrifically mismanaged a game on Thanksgiving. So just for a second, pretend he's a rock solid hire. And for a second, pretend that Fields is a rock solid quarterback. Which would you rather be? The Lions, who have to find a quarterback in potentially a really bad 2022 class, or the Bears, who have to find a coach in potentially a weaker coaching cycle?
I would rather be the Bears because I mean, here's the thing. Like, at least for me, well, I mean, we've all seen it, man. We're all Bears fans. Like, we've all seen it. How hard is it to find a quarterback? It's a hell of a lot harder to find a quarterback. And if you go back to that 2018 hiring cycle, right, where you had John Gruden was the first hire, Matt Nagy was the second hire. Who was the last hire out of that cycle?
Was it Reich?
It was Frank Reich. Frank Reich was not even on anybody's radar. Didn't get a single interview. He was basically a last second choice because of what happened with Josh McDaniels. He's been one of the better coaches. The same thing with Mike Vrabel. A lot of people looked at Vrabel and said, I don't know about this one. I did. So I don't think – so here's my thing is I don't think on the surface that a lot of these guys look good. But what I will say is it's really hard to be able to judge that and really figure it out. There's been a lot of people slammed the Sean McVay hire back in 2017. They said, what are you doing hiring a guy that's 33 years old that has very minimal experience? And look at how that's turned out. So – I think when you weigh that with how the Lions are going to have to try to find a way to a quarterback in this draft class, it's just – and even if you go beyond that, because really Jared Goff's contract is going to make it to where he's going to be on the roster next year anyway. But even after that, how do you find a quarterback? I don't know. That's just my take. It's not a homerism take. I just look at it from an overall perspective of what's harder to find, what's more unpredictable, and I think that you can point to finding a quarterback for both of those, right?
Totally. And to use your own example with Reich and the Colts, I feel like when it comes to finding a quarterback, Aaron, I consider Chris Ballard to be a pretty good GM, personally. Like, how good? Let's just say good and go from there. I consider Reich to be a pretty good coach, but you can clearly tell what the pressures of getting a quarterback are when you look at the Carson Wentz trade in Indianapolis and the Sam Darnold trade in Carolina. For some reason, both of these teams who had other options or could have been patient clearly weren't. And it tells me, and it's a nice reminder, right, that you can play as many video games like Madden or like some GMing game on your phone where the owner gives you like 4 years to make change, and that's just not real. Nowadays, you get one rebuilding season, maybe at the very start of your career, and from there, it's time to win. And it's not even that necessarily I feel like Carson Wentz was like that bad, but exactly like Bob Vecchi said in the chat here, speaking of the Colts, like I feel like that Carson Wentz trade finally had its comeuppance today. They couldn't beat the Jaguars. You know what I mean?
And they gave up a first-round pick. When it's all said and done, they gave up a first-round pick for Carson Wentz. That is asinine. I don't care how you cut it. Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I mean, the reality of it is simple. If teams could properly identify quarterbacks all the time, then nobody would be losing their jobs. I mean, that's just really what it comes down to. And that's not to say that there would be, 32 great quarterbacks, but what it would mean is you wouldn't see mistake after mistake after mistake from the same teams and just teams in general. It's just luck of the draw, man. Hopefully.
And obvious ones at that, Aaron.
Sake.
Nobody, I'll tell you right now, I'll give you guys a transparent note. Nobody's blowing up my email inbox with scouting offers or something like that. I'm a guy on the internet talking about things. And Aaron,
Aren't we all?
when you and I can point out that Teddy Bridgewater going to the Broncos, like trading for Teddy Bridgewater, is a side grade maybe with Drew Lock, and yet it costs Vic Fangio his job. That sucks, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Like,
it does.
It sucks for Broncos fans that have to live through. I mean, gosh, I don't know how you felt, Aaron, but the 17-game season could not have come at a worse time this year, because this year just dragged on and on and on.
I got to be honest. I don't know if I like the 17-game season. I'm all about football, but I mean, could these honestly, especially this week? I mean, honestly, could this week have been any more meaningless for the most part? The one meaningful game is going to happen tonight. We get more meaningful games out of a week 17 in a 16-game season than and obviously it's only 1 year. But what I've noticed is when your team is bad, that extra 17th game, oh my God, man! Like we could have already been done with this. We could have already have known if Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy were out the door. Like we could have been completely done with this. Like Matt Nagy had already been hired 4 years to the date or whatever, or 5 years, whatever it was. What was that, a day or two ago? Like, I mean, it just kind of gives you an idea how much more things have drug out. They started the season a little bit later. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm glad it's over. It's obviously, I love football season, but it's time. It's time to see the off season and everything else that happens. I think, we're kind of back in that cycle where the off season is going to be more exciting than the season one that we just watched.
Yep. Speaking of, you ready to grip and rip?
Let's do it, man.
For the live audience, I figure Aaron and I will do a relatively quick show. Not looking to go an hour about this game, but maybe we'll talk a little bit after. Who knows? Because it's been a long year and it's 2022. But either way, let's grip and rip it.
All right, let's do it.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Me, a Chicago Bears podcast hosted by yours truly, Robert Schmitz, right here on the Windy City Gridiron podcasting network. And I'm here with both the BearReport and also Windy City Gridiron's Aaron Leming, who you joined me early on in the season, Aaron. I felt like it was fitting to bring you on to close it as the Bears go from up 14-0, seemingly dancing on the line on the Vikings, to 21 unanswered points and an emphatic end to the Matt Nagy era, which it is the end of the Matt Nagy era, right?
Yeah, it has to be, man. Yeah, that was, kind of like we're talking about right before we started recording it. It's just, could there have been a more fitting end? I'm sitting there thinking, I was like, man, they're going to win this game. Draft positioning is going to be a little bit different. People are going to start getting a little crazy, feelings in their head, thinking they won 3 straight games, and maybe this team isn't as bad as we thought. It's like, okay, now back down to reality. They go in. They were up 14-0 at one point, almost in the halftime. They were up 14-0. You look at the final score, 31-17, and once again they got into Vikings territory 6 times. What did they do? They came away with 17 points. It's just the same broken record, man. I mean, luckily, I think we're done living it. But thank God the season's over with.
Honestly, Aaron, I thought it was hilarious because, to your point, they're up 14-0, which is big in any NFL setting, but especially when you're Chicago. But the wild part is that they had to bounce off of so many walls to get there, right? Like, they failed on a couple of 4th downs, which more on that later, am I right? But they got to the red zone, I think you said it 5, maybe 6 times, got 1 touchdown that I still can't believe the Vikings left open. Like, don't get me wrong, every defense makes mistakes, every defense blows coverages, but Damian Williams leaking out that open felt like making it a little too easy for Andy Dalton. If I was a Vikings fan, I'm not, though. So I'll point out the massive amount of Matt Nagy 4th and 1 pass calls, which eventually came to bite them in the butt really hard. I think it was 3 4th and 1s, 3 pass plays, 2 sacks for a loss of 29, and a pick 6 at the end of the day. The Bears offense technically had given them the lead, but to your point, it's not like they were playing ultra efficient football to kick off the day, and it ended up that they needed those points for the later part of the game and just didn't have them.
Yeah, as a whole, they had 4 4th down, 4 failed 4th, well, I guess 5, but we won't count the other one because that was, meaningless.
4th and 19.
Check down at the end of the game. Yeah, but yeah, they have 4, and and when the game actually mattered, right? They have 4 of those. They were 0 for 4 All 4 of those were passes. 3 of those ended in sacks for 35 yards, and there was a pick six. And, but it just kind of goes back to show you that once again, it was just a situation in which the Bears don't learn. Matt Nagy doesn't learn. It's the same thing over and over. You got David Montgomery losing his mind on the sidelines because he's sitting there on the sidelines as a 4th down and 1 is happening, as he's your best offensive weapon. It's just, again, man, I don't know that there's a more fitting way for this to end, for the Bears season to end, for Matt Nagy's tenure to end with the Bears. Hopefully Ryan Pace's tenure, but I guess we'll have to, we'll figure that out at some point in time. But there's just no better way to end a season than how it happened today.
I mean, talking about how it's the perfect way to end the Nagy era, totally spot on, especially considering that starting in 2018, sure, but I feel like this got really obvious in 2019 that Matt Nagy will be, that you've seen Princess Bride, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's absolutely the villain at the end going, well, so I'm thinking that I'll do this, but because you think that I'll do this, I would think to do this, but then you'll think that I'm going to realize that. So Matt Nagy at one point, I think it was one of the early 4th and 1s, ran a fake mesh play that the Vikings, I don't think, thought too hard about what the Bears were going to do on 4th and 1 because they weren't fooled when Cole Kmet and I don't remember who the other crosser was, didn't cross and instead snagged back outwards. And Dalton just sat there looking at nobody open and said, what am I supposed to do with this?
Well, it's the same exact thing that happened 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when they played him. It was literally the same exact story. Get in the Vikings territory. They ratchet up their defense. The Bears can't score points. It's just the same thing over and over. And it was the same thing, too, because it looked like the Vikings knew what they were going to do every single time the last time around, too. I don't even know, man. Let me just say this, right? I think, everything I've heard about Matt Nagy, I think Matt Nagy's a really good dude. I definitely wish success for him down the road. Obviously things started off pretty well and have not gone very well. I have nothing personally against Matt Nagy at all, but I think and I hope for his sake that he learns a lot about his 4 years in Chicago and how you're supposed to build each year, right? He talked about that in the very beginning. You're supposed to build each year. And what it came down to was him basically scrambling to figure out what the problem was year after year, game after game after game. And I hope he can learn something and try to figure out. I mean, really, he's not an offensive play caller. And really, he probably shouldn't even be, in my opinion, I don't even think it should be his offense that's being run. But I hope that he's able to learn. He's still a young dude. I mean, I hope he's able to learn from all this. I hope he eventually gets another shot. With all that being said, though, I am beyond relieved that this is the end of the Matt Nagy era, and hopefully better things come down the line because I don't know that I can watch incompetent offensive football in Chicago for too much longer, man. It's so painful year and year,
Same.
year and year, never ends.
Well, and one thing that I've seen the chat bring up while we've had this podcast, Aaron, that comes to mind, and God forbid, I don't want to step out of line and say something stupid, but for the sake of beginning discussion, Aaron, it is wild when you look at head coaching around the NFL, how often a head coach is hired from one side of the ball, say an offensive head coach, right? And then the offense immediately goes in the tank, right? Vic Fangio, a defensive head coach, obviously, his defense is largely the problem. Mike Vrabel in Tennessee hasn't been able to get the defense really fixed until, say, this year, and Nagy's offense never got off the ground. It does make me wonder when it comes to the next head coaching hire, and I'm really just postulating, I'm not even thinking about anybody in particular, Aaron, how much it comes down to how much maybe we overrate a head coach's background, right? That John Fox, to use him as an example, yeah, he was terrible in Chicago, especially once he brought Danger Zone Loggins on in to do offensive coordination. But Fox seemed to be a clear delegator and kept his team out of nasty penalties, false starts, and the procedural penalties that we've seen just ripple throughout the Nagy era. And it does make me curious as far as when the next head coach is eventually hired, whether background should be as important as sometimes I think we like to make it, picking out whether it's Kellen Moore, Josh McDaniels, Byron Leftwich, Brian Dabble. We act as if that offensive head coach is going to bring their offense over, but it does seem like there's a lot of situations here where it's not the background of the coach that ends up being the shining piece of the team. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and I mean, to add to your point, Dan Quinn was the same way in Atlanta. We watched, what was it, the first year or two, their defense was pretty solid, but then it ended up turning into their defense was absolutely awful, and their offense was the one doing things. And a lot of that, I think, had to do with the fact that he inherited Matt Ryan and all those pieces on the offense. Yeah, I think what's going to get lost in this head coaching search is they need the best overall head coach, right? And I know that some people have got the preferences whether they want to go, whether they want to go offensive, whether they want to go defensive. You have other people who want to go first time, second time, or even a college guy. And I think really what it's going to come
You
down
can say
to is
the college guy's name out loud, Aaron. Everybody knows who you're thinking
well,
of.
but I don't even think it's just Harbaugh though, because Harbaugh's at least proven that he can do it. My bigger issue is with a guy like Ryan Day, where if you look at the overall within the last 30, 35, 40 years, if you look at the overall success rate of college football coaches that have never coached in the NFL and they come in, the success rate is very, very, very small. And I think that's something that a lot of people are forgetting. I mean, we're seeing the same thing with Matt Rule. Obviously, it's a little bit different with a guy like Cliff Kingsbury, but this is the first time that he's had any sort of success as well. So, really what it comes down to in the research that I've done, and Jack from Windy City Gridiron has actually done a great job with one of his articles and kind of helping out some of my research, is it seems like the first time guys definitely have more success. I think the one thing that really almost guarantees you no success and no Super Bowl would be hiring a coach that has already won a Super Bowl. There's never been a coach in the history of the league that has won a Super Bowl. At least, well, I should take that back. I don't think that there is a coach in the history of the league that has won a Super Bowl with one team and been able to do it with somebody else. I could be wrong on that, and if I am, it's very, 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 very small. But the success rate, because that's obviously how you're going to weigh everything, right? Is you're going to look at it
Right.
and say, okay, can this guy get to the Super Bowl? And if this guy can get to the Super Bowl, can they win it? And if you look at that, just that alone, the first-time candidates are the better of the three when you're looking at, first-time guy versus, second-time retread for a guy that hasn't won a Super Bowl versus, the college guys. So that's at least worth keeping in mind. My next thing, and I'm hoping to get to this over the next few days, is kind of figuring out offensive and defensive backgrounds, because I think if you look at a lot of the guys in the NFL right now that are having a lot of sustained success, a lot of them actually have a defensive background, and even some of them have special teams background. Obviously, John Harbaugh is one of those guys. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think that fans and the Bears as a whole would be smart to kind of weigh each option. I know always the argument is going to be, well, if you hire a defensive guy, then how can you guarantee that you're going to be able to keep an offensive mind there and blah, 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 blah. We see it all the time, man. A lot of these, I mean, look at Bill Belichick. Obviously he's more of an outlier than anybody, but look at a lot of these defensive coaches that have had success. They have found ways to get the right offensive minds in the building and also have offensive minds on their coaching staff that could step in and be that next guy.
Right. I mean, to your exact point, it's interesting when you look through a lot of these defensive options that you remember that the offensive guys they hire, they don't even have to be defensive, right? You could look at Jim Harbaugh's coordinator path when it comes to offensive guys. I mean, it's hard to refute that just about anybody that Jim Harbaugh hires as his offensive coordinator ends up being a pretty good coordinator. Whether it's like Greg Roman, Pep Hamilton, or the other guys that he's coached, he's got a clear eye for what he wants to hear in an offensive interview, if nothing else, right? It's not that he, quote unquote, is an offensive mind, but you still, like, if you're, I don't know, a defensive coach, I mean, you obviously have know a thing or two about offense because you have to stop it, right? Mm-hmm. So you may not be a quote-unquote offense guy, but you've got your own opinions. And when Vic Fangio, say, hires an offensive mind that maybe, and granted, I'm plucking somebody out with Fangio. I don't actually know enough about the Broncos staff to pretend to have an idea about what Fangio thinks of offense, but everybody puts on these defensive guys that they must be smash mouth, run the ball, protect the defense mindsets. And I just don't think that that's always true, especially nowadays in the college ranks, where a lot of the defensive head coaches are the ones going for it on fourth down, playing aggressive, and trying to get into pass and PA mindsets, you know?
Well, I mean, look at Brandon Staley. I think he's a prime example of somebody that was just recently hired that was a quote-unquote defensive guy, but also has a little bit of an offensive background as a player. So, yeah, I think a lot of it just comes down to, and I'm kind of getting out of that mindset of you need to have a a coach that can call plays, whether that's defensive coordinator,
Right.
offensive coordinator, whatever it is. I'm actually kind of going away from that, saying get a field general, get a guy that can, kind of like John Fox said, I coordinate all three positions, offensive, defensive, special teams, but you let those guys make the play calls and you focus on being a head coach. And I think that's one of the things for Matt Nagy where he's going to have to get a lot better at, right? Where I think a lot of the in-game stuff and just basically allowing himself to be the head coach and not the offensive guru, because frankly, he's not an offensive guru, but I don't know. It's going to be, again, there's no real, it's kind of like the quarterback thing, right? There's no real, magic thing that you can do in order to find that right guy. But I do think that there are absolutely parameters that have proven to be more successful than others that need to be examined a little bit more within this hire. And really, I think the only one to me that I'm like, man, I just can't get behind just because it feels like such a boring hire due to his past job in Minnesota is Leslie Frazier. I can't, man. I can't do it. There's so many good defensive coordinators out there. Matt Eberflus, Todd Bowles, man. There's just a ton of them. Like, why Leslie Frazier? Why? I'm hoping that's just a lazy tie. I really hope that's all it is.
I hope
you played
so.
for the 85 Bears because that's the only thing that makes sense.
I mean, like you're saying, to me the problem with Frazier, to pick on Frazier before we get back to the post-game piece, because we're off on the tangent everyone wants to talk about, so there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem to me with the Frazier idea is that I feel like it's just logically unsound, right? It's not the part where he would be connected to the Bears. It's that if you want the former Bear, go get Jim Harbaugh. If you want the defensive mind, I think there are better defensive minds. I mean, whether it's Todd Bowles, whether it is, his name escapes me, but it's the Bills defensive coordinator, Mayo, I think is his name.
Oh, you're talking about is Jared Mayo.
Jared Mayo's getting a ton of play recently. And so I think that there are at least other guys that you would interview. And granted, we're not going to be in the interview room. So Leslie Frazier getting an interview, it's not like that breaks my heart. But it does feel like a lazy connection. And if we just heard them announce at 10 p.m. on Monday, Leslie Frazier's the new head coach of the Chicago Bears, it would feel that way, but I tend to doubt that's going to happen.
No, well, I mean, they got to figure out what they're doing, regardless if they fire Pace or not. They got to figure out the front office first, and I think that's where, I guess this will be the last thing on this. I think that's where some fans got to not put the cart before the horse. I know a lot of people are like, oh, get Vic Fangio back in the building. The Bears have got to figure out, what exactly is going on within the front office. I was just looking at something. It looked like Brad Biggs just tweeted out something about, looked like, Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace were walking out together. I don't know what that exactly what that means, but the Bears have a lot of work to do in front of them, even if they keep Ryan Pace, right? Because they got to figure out how they're going to structure the front office, what they're going to do with Pace. And then, they got to find a head coach before we can even talk about coordinator hires. And then as far as Leslie Frazier goes, last thing I'll say on that, even if you want to bring in a minority hire, which is absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of great minority candidates out there right now, whether you want to go offensive or defensive. He's not the best candidate. I just don't see it because you could go, I mean, really look at Tampa Bay. You could go Todd Bowles or Byron Leftwich from that. There is a ton of good coordinators and ideas and whatever else, Bears connections, minority connections, defensive connections, offensive connections, whatever connection you want to make. It feels like, at least on paper, there's a lot better of options, even if you want to go with a retread. If you want to go with retread, there's plenty of those options as well. I just don't understand the Leslie Frazier love. I'm sure he's a great dude. That's just somebody I don't want to go down that road. I really hope the Bears don't either.
I'm of the same mind. And it's so awkward, too, because you talk about Ryan Pace, and I feel like the Ryan Pace conversation, for instance, is a really complex one. It was a lot less complex in 2020, if I could be really candid, but in 2021 I feel like Pace knocked the draft out of the park. Granted, he had to use a little bit of future capital to get it done, but nobody's taking back the Justin Fields trade. I don't think anybody's really taking back the Tevin Jenkins trade, regardless of what people say about how much that third-round pick would have helped. But you get the idea. I mean, with Larry Borum looking like at least a swing offensive tackle, rough game today, but potentially a future starter. You've got Thomas Graham, who every time we see him seems to be around the ball and sticky in coverage. That's really solid. Khalil Herbert could be the heir apparent to David Montgomery, depending on what decisions get made. Blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. Angelo Blackson, free agent agent signings like Akeem Hicks, the Mac trade, there are enough goods on Pace's resume for anybody to be a fan. I mean, when you're a GM for 7 years, the team is built by Ryan Pace. And if anybody out there is a Bears fan, you probably have a favorite player, and Ryan Pace probably had to do with getting him on the team. Right? The trouble that
I think Pat O'Donnell's the only one that wasn't brought in by Ryan Pace.
I think you might be right.
Yeah, Pat O'Donnell, the punter. The punter's the only one that hasn't been brought in by Ryan Pace. Yeah, no, I agree.
The trouble is, Aaron, is that I don't see a world where Ryan Pace gets extended and also gets so much leash that he can reevaluate the roster, say, we're not quite there yet, and tool towards 2023, even if that means getting even worse in 2022 with an eye on winning a Super Bowl. I can't help but worry that if Pace is still on the team, or if Pace is still running the team in a month, that leads us back towards 9-8 at best. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So my thought process with that is I think it depends on how you get to 9-8, right? Because obviously the Bears got a lot of work to do, but I think you can also look at how the NFC playoff picture has panned out and say that, are the Bears really that, like, with a good offseason, the Bears really that much worse than the 49ers? Are they really that much worse than the Eagles? Right. Are they really that much worse than some of these other wild card teams? And who knows? I mean, obviously, if Aaron Rodgers leaves, are they really that much worse than the Packers without Aaron Rodgers? I don't know. So, but I think the big key is how do you get there? And that's something that it's kind of one of those things where, 6-11 is a lot easier to swallow when you're playing all the young guys and when you're building towards a younger core as a whole. It's not as easy to be able to swallow when you have the second oldest roster in the league and your head coach refused to play younger players all year long. And I think that's kind of where, yes, Matt Nagy shares a lot of blame in this, but at the same time, how are the Bears, as mediocre as they are, with the writing has been on the wall for what it has been over the last few years, how are you the second oldest roster in the league moving into 2021? Those are the kind of things that I look at where you can say, yeah, you can point out a lot of good stuff that Ryan Pace did. And I don't think that anybody being objective can say otherwise, but I think that the pure panic that he has seen since 2018 being as good as it was, and a lot of people say, well, the first 3 years you got to throw out his rebuild. Okay, that's fine, but he had 1 year of a contention window, and things have steadily gone downhill since. And I think that that's where you have to look at it and really say, is this guy the guy? Is he the one that we want leading this team moving forward that can make quality decisions within the draft? Like you pointed out, okay, I don't think there's anything wrong with trading up for Justin Fields. Having conviction and all that fun stuff is great. But the problem is when you turn around and you already have a light draft class and then you turn around and trade up again for Tevin Jenkins in the second round, and then you don't pick again until the fifth round, this isn't a one-off. And I think that's kind of the thing that a lot of people have to understand. This isn't a one-off because if you go back to the 2019 draft, they have David Montgomery, who's a running back, and Duke Shelley, who is a replacement level nickelback. Those are the only two guys that are on the roster that were from the 2019 draft class. That is the issue that you have when you start trading up. Look back at 2018. James Daniels is about to be a free agent. He's been a pretty good player. I think you'd probably wanted a little bit more out of an interior lineman in the second round. Anthony Miller's not even on the team. He was a second-round pick. They gave up a second-round pick in 2019 to be able to get him in 2018. So I think it's more, at least for me, the core issues and how he goes about things and how he has so much quote unquote conviction about missing's not the issue. The issue is when you throw so many resources and you're so damn wrong that it finally comes back to bite the team. And I think we've seen an accumulation of those decisions over the last few years where it's like, I just don't know from a core fundamental standpoint if you can continue to move forward with Ryan Pace knowing that this is just who he is.
Oh, sure. And I mean, it doesn't help anything, Aaron, that when you've got quality scheme and a quality quarterback, in this case, unfortunately, I have to reference the green and gold enemy in Wisconsin, right?
Well, they're a really well-run organization.
You'll turn Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Alan Lazard into solid 2s and 3s with Cobb as an extra 4 that helps out. And if you shifted all those guys to Chicago, truly, I don't know how much better MVS looks than Marquise Goodwin, to use an example, right?
Yeah, I would say Alan Lazard is probably looking like Javon Wims in Chicago if he played in
Probably,
Chicago.
right? Like there is something to the idea that scheme, a number one wide receiver, maybe like Devontae Adams demands so much attention on the field that I think he sticks out. But there is something, like you're saying, to the suggestion that whether it's coaching scheme, a quarterback, level up, probably both in tandem, one doesn't tend to happen without the other, that the rest of the roster will just look better when things are going well. I mean, Deebo Samuel is incredible. He is. But because he's in Shanahan's scheme, we're seeing just how versatile he is instead of saying, hey, Deebo's pretty good. I mean, there's a huge difference between the way the best can use, say, Cooper Kupp, who's quote-unquote a slot receiver and is one of the most dominant players in football, versus the way that the Bears leverage somebody like Mooney, where Mooney got 1,000 yards. He did great today. He's honestly had as good of a number or a season in 2021 as I think anybody realistically could have asked of him. Like, of course, we hope he might be even better in the future as scheme and quarterback, again, hopefully come online. But given just how poor the Bears' passing offense were, for him to get 1,000 yards, 17-game season or not, I feel like that's a real accomplishment. I don't know. It is interesting, like you're saying, Aaron, when you look around the roster, that the problem I have is more with the fact that the Bears have Alec Ogletree and Danny Trevathan as ILB 2 and 3 behind Roquan Smith, or Tashawn Gibson behind Eddie Jackson, who got mossed today. Oh, man.
Yeah, Eddie Jackson had a rough game. He had a rough game in general. He's actually been pretty damn good this year. Today was rough. It was a rough one. That was a rough one for the majority of the secondary, though, man. There was dudes running wide open the second half. It's like, did they forget that the secondary – well, I mean, they did have 8 players on the field at one point, so maybe they just forgot to field the secondary on a few different plays. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, you just never know at this point. But, yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I don't know, man. I don't think – because that's the thing. Like, so I think the Bears are a bad football team right now, and I think they need a lot of work. But this isn't 2015. This isn't 2014 transitioning into 2015 when Phil Emery and Mark Trestman are ushered out the door, and you're looking at a roster that basically needs to be fully rebuilt. You've got cancers all over your locker. You have no long-term, no long-term solution at quarterback. You don't have anything. Like, this isn't remotely close to the same situation. But I think you have to figure out how big of a step do you think you could take next year, right? Towards building the future, not just towards throwing these veteran stopgaps in there and hoping that you can win 8 or 9 games, but how much better can you really get moving into next year? And again, I mean, it's easy for us to look at it right now and say, the Bears aren't going to be that much better than a 6-win team next year, right? It's easy to say that, but at the same time, how many people thought that the Cincinnati Bengals were going to be as good as they were and that they were going to win the NFC North? How many people thought that the Philadelphia Eagles were going to go from the disaster that they had last year? I don't know if you remember week 17 or not. They essentially threw last year's game to get a better draft pick. They fired a Super Bowl winning head coach. Everybody's like, what are they doing? And they're a 9-win team. Yeah, they're a 9-win team and they're in the playoffs. Things can change quickly, but it's the approach and how you do it that means the most. And I think that's going to be the key for the Bears moving forward. They're not that far off from being a playoff team, a wild card team. They're not that far off from having a pretty quality core. But there's a lot of big decisions and a lot of big pieces that have to be added over the next few years in order for that to become a reality.
Oh, yeah. And to talk about the other elephant in the room, you mentioned records. What makes a team – I mean, the easiest thing, Aaron, that we can talk about that makes a team go from 8-8 last year to 6-11 this year. Sure, quarterback change. Sure, like tumultuous differences across the roster. Sure, Bill Lazor becoming the play caller. You can blame whatever you want to. The schedule is a huge factor. The Bears played a really tough schedule this year, and they get a much easier schedule on paper so far next year, where it's less of the true blue-blooded contenders that you say. They have to play the Rams, Green Bay twice, Tampa Bay, and the Ravens all in the same season. Oh, that's not good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, look at the schedule construction. Home away, home away, home away, home away all season. How does that even happen? Yeah, no, I agree with you. I you would have to think on paper, because they ended up, I think, strength of schedule. I'll have to look at the end of tonight. Strength of schedule going into today, they had the third toughest schedule, and obviously part of that's because they won 6 games and they lost 11. A little bit of that, but at the same time, you can also look at some really bad teams that still had really easy strength of schedule. So yeah, I mean, you would have to think that the schedule is going to. There's just a lot of things working against them, but I think. I don't know how you had them. I had them at 7. I had them at 7-10 this season. So they're one game off. They're one game off from what I expected them to be. There's not a whole lot of surprise. It was a little uglier than I thought, but there's not a whole lot of surprise. When you run it back with something that's broken, this is what happens.
Mm-hmm. I had them between a 6 and 10 win cloud, I called it, because you never know how the toss-up games go. And hey, if San Francisco, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore go a different way, maybe the team just lucks their way into 10 wins, but it happened. And so, you could say that about a lot of football teams, but they lost emphatically enough times so that they were going to end up here. I know when it comes to record, Aaron, I will never stop thinking about that same 2020 team where Nick Foles and a lifeless Bears football team just got destroyed by Tennessee. That awful, awful game. That same football team won 8 games and went to the playoffs somehow. So teams like the Eagles,
speaking of schedule,
exactly. So teams like the Eagles, who, hey, the Eagles have been feisty this year. I don't want to take too much away from what they've done in Philadelphia, but it is awfully nice when you play the Giants twice. And I mean, the Bears can relate to beating a team in blue, but you get the idea. Schedules make a difference, and so the Bears, I think, with this loss, they locked it in. I'm pretty sure they had it either way, but they lock in that 3rd place finish, which is big in terms of what division they play next year. And so it should be a little softer, but like we're saying, the big change is obviously going to come with GM, head coach, and less so with Jason Peters getting out of the way, and now it's Tevin Jenkins' time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, obviously the schedule part, I think regardless, it was like a 99% chance that they were going to be playing the 3rd place schedule, even if they won. Obviously, they locked it in. Really, the only thing that changed today, because I know Washington won, and they were at 6 wins with the Bears, and now they moved to 7. So I think, I can't remember who there was one other team that was locked in at 6 wins with the Bears as well, and that's only for draft positioning. Outside of that, it really doesn't really make a whole lot of difference, because I want to say it's the AFC South, the NFC South, and the NFC West are the 3 third-place teams that they would play next year. So obviously that's going to benefit them in some ways. But it's just sometimes things get stacked against you. This was never the Bears' year, and I think that's kind of key to remember. This was never the Bears' year. Obviously, you'd like to see a lot of things go better than they did. But I also I don't know, man. Like, I think that the Bears have an opportunity during the offseason, over these next few weeks, over these next few months, to completely change the direction. But a lot of it's going to depend on Justin Fields, man, because Justin Fields is a good quarterback next year. And we just saw the same thing with the Chargers and the Bengals as well. If you got a good quarterback, good young quarterback, a lot of things can change in a hurry. Perceptions can change in a hurry.
Yep, absolutely. Now, because it's a post-game podcast, Aaron, I am obligated to give out some kind of game ball. So at the end of we'll go to sponsorship break, and once we come back, let's hand some out, and we'll call it a season. Sound good?
Well, let's do it.
Perfect. See you on the other side. And we are back with Bear With Me. I'm here with WCG's own Aaron Leming, and I want to convert game balls, Aaron, into something that kind of commemorates the end of the season. Let's call them thank you notes. They can be satirical. They can be serious. You can thank David Montgomery for making the season watchable. You can thank Trevis Gibson for the way that he's developed. But I'll start out by thanking Andy Dalton in this specific game for reminding us that the Andy Dalton led offense was probably not going to jump out to some magical 5-3, 7-3 start, and that even though Justin Fields obviously struggled within this Matt Nagy offense, that number 14 probably wasn't some heir apparent answer that was going to fix all the Bears' problems either, because between him and Matt Nagy, this era ended with a really wonderful moment of closure that, like we talked about in the earlier part of the season, I mean, there aren't any questions left to answer, right? What a magical year that we actually got answers to everything.
Yeah. No, that's fair. So yeah, I don't know. So am I supposed to give a game ball now? Is that
You give out some thank you notes.
okay? Thank you. Well, so I'm gonna. So my first, I'll be serious with this one, just because, I think a lot of people feel the
Go
same
for it.
way. Akeem Hicks, man, it really bums
Yes.
me out that we didn't get to see him. It also irritates the hell out of me that Matt Nagy didn't make him a captain in last week's game that he actually played in. And then all of a sudden, here we are, and he's not playing again. Yeah. Either way, man, that was probably I would say, and maybe I'm wrong here. I think that might have been Ryan Pace's best free agent signing. He came in on a 2 year. It was like a 2 year, $10 million deal, and he was fantastic. And he wasn't a given either. He was a signing that happened. I want to say, and I could be wrong, but I want to say it was like a week or two into free agency. But either way, man, Akeem Hicks has been exactly everything and more that you could possibly ask for from any Bears player to put on the uniform. The guy was, I mean, obviously he missed 20 games over the last 3 years due to injury, but I mean, anytime he was out there, the dude was just an absolute animal. He was a fan favorite. He was a fantastically underrated defensive lineman for the majority of his time in Chicago. Unfortunately, I think it's coming to an end, and I think he's going to end up going to a contender where he can make some good money and also play for a good team next year. But if this is the end, a big thank you, seriously, to Akeem Hicks, because you have been an amazing player for the Bears. You've been somebody that has made it a joy to watch the Bears defense and a joy to watch the Bears overall. So thank you.
He absolutely did, and I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, the fact that, look, the rotating captains thing has gotten so much play that I don't think we necessarily need to talk about it anymore. I mean, Bruce Irvin, Jermaine Ifedi got to be captains, but Akeem Hicks, not today. But
Yeah.
yeah, but like you're saying, I mean, Hicks has been a phenomenal Chicago Bear. I think it's rare. Our own Jack Silverstein talked about this, where he talked about how once you get over about 30, 35, which I am not, but Jack is, your favorite players tend to be cemented, right?
Yeah.
And that Akeem Hicks was the guy that broke the mold for Bears fans of all ages. And so to see him go, I mean, it's truly one of those moments where I think the football business is a bit on the cruel side sometimes because it makes too much sense. Like, my heart wants to keep him in Chicago forever, but my head knows that the money and his position, it's just not going to really work out, especially given how many games he's missed to injury. Even so, it's just so sad to see him go. I'll give out another thank you note to Darnell Mooney, because no other Bears receiver cracked 600 yards but Mooney. He was really the only shining star on a Bears receiving core that really struggled to get open consistently. I mean, hey, credit to Cole Kmet. He's the only other receiver that broke 400 yards, finishing the year with over 564. My ESPN app hasn't updated to collect this game's stats, but Kmet and Mooney, but namely Mooney, as far as receiving talent goes, seem to be the only people that in ISO situations you could expect to get open, instead of saying, oh, wow, look at that. They actually did, and ending up surprised by it, you know?
Yeah. No, I hear you. Yeah, this one's going to be sarcastic. Big thank you to Matt Nagy for making the development of Justin Fields in his rookie year and actually having a stud rookie quarterback the most miserable experience on the face of the planet. I honestly, I can't even begin to describe how frustrating this entire year has been. And obviously not all of it's on Matt Nagy, but the fact that Justin Fields, through the injuries, through the fact that he didn't get any starting reps during training camp or the preseason, and to follow this stupid plan and then all of a sudden abandon it a game and a half into the season for Justin Fields. And I just thank you for completely ruining it, because I feel like even with Trubisky, there was never any worry that he was ever going to lose his job or that there was any really sabotaging going on. And I'm not saying that Nagy sabotaged anything, but what I will say is that it was a night and day difference between watching the offense when you watch Nick Foles run it and when you watch Andy Dalton run it, and the play calls that were coming in versus what we saw with Justin Fields. So, good riddance at this point, man. I cannot wait to see, because I really do think Justin Fields is going to take a huge step next year. I cannot wait to see what he's going to look like next year. But Matt Nagy, you've made this a fun experience, or what should have been a fun experience, just a completely miserable experience for most Bears fans everywhere.
I'll also throw in for the Matt Nagy thank you note. I want to make a little signature on the bottom, right? Where thank you to Matt Nagy for ruining many fans' perception on fourth down aggression. Because Matt Nagy, especially over the last 2 years, got as aggressive on fourth downs, not quite as aggressive as quote-unquote the nerds want, but I feel like he started getting a nice pulse on when to go for it, when to press the issue, and his fourth down play calling has been, honestly, I would argue it might be worse than his goal line play calling. And his goal line play calling obviously leaves a lot to be desired, but Aaron, how many situations have we seen a huge fourth down come up for the Bears, right? Not like, oh, this is kind of a big play, they're going for it on fourth down, but like one that the whole stadium can tell that they really need it, and oh my word, the play call is nobody open, Nick Foles / Andy Dalton / Justin Fields / Mitch Trubisky running for their lives and ending up with a fail. It's I don't blame any of the fans that are like, just punt it there. Take the 3 points. Because the way that they tend to call plays on fourth down, it doesn't feel like a good gamble. Even though on 4th and 1, for crying out loud, you just give it to your running back. You got to get it at least 1 out of 3 times, right?
Yeah, no, that was, dude, that was, Matt Nagy made Andy Dalton look like a rookie quarterback today, out there running for his life on those 3 sacks that he took on fourth down today, just purely based on the play calling, the fact that there was absolutely nothing there. Yeah, it's a broken record of just the same failures over and over and over and over and over throughout, multiple seasons. Thank God we don't have to watch it anymore.
He went out as we came into 2020 or 2019, I believe, a 50+ passing attempt game in a losing effort that ended up embarrassed. So
fantastic job.
Well, at least we should have something to talk about on Monday, because you gotta imagine that the head coaching the new head coach search starts soon. But do you have any final thoughts on this game or the end of the season?
Not really, man. I feel like, kind of like we talked about, right? I don't think, and maybe people get this by my tweets and think think the exact opposite, but I don't think the Bears are in that bad of a spot. I think this is absolutely 100% a very critical offseason ahead. The Bears have a lot of tough decisions to make. Hopefully they'll make the right decisions. But I don't think the Bears are nearly as far off as they were coming out of 2014, moving into 2015. They don't need a full rebuild. They should have their quarterback. They have some core pieces there. Obviously, this roster needs a lot of work. They need a lot of work, on the inside of the organization. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I feel like the deck was stacked against them moving into the year. There's not a whole lot of surprises. Obviously, you'd like to see things go better in terms of their overall rookie class, in terms of playing time. Tevin Jenkins not having back surgery, Justin Fields not getting hurt, maybe getting some first team reps in training camp and preseason, and starting the season as a quarterback number 1, and actually not getting hurt. But all in all, I don't think there's any long-term damage down here. I think there's stuff to be excited about. And like we pointed out, man, teams turn it around every year. There's always those few surprise teams every year. So I'm not saying the Bears would be one of those teams. We've got to see how the offseason plays out. But I don't think that things are nearly as dire as maybe what some people are thinking they are. So that would be my overall thoughts on the season. The game, I have zero thoughts, just because the game was meaningless. Thank God it's over. I enjoyed the game for what it was, and that's the fact that it was the last game that we'll get to see for a while from the Bears in terms of regular season. But I'm ready for Monday. I'm ready to see what all happens over the next few days, a few weeks, a few months, all that. It's going to be a very busy offseason, and it should be exciting.
Yep. I mean, to your point, to finish up with my own final thoughts, there's a reason that I think many of us started the season this year. Basically, I mean, going so far as to say on podcasts, like, if we could just sim the season, get to 2022, we would. Because it was always going to be a bit of a beatdown. Murderers Row happened. The Bears fell to 4-10, which I don't know if anybody had them all the way down there at 4-10, but then again, I mean, maybe, right? And Justin Fields, got ridiculous expectations put on him. I mean, don't get me wrong. I also thought that the Bears' rookie touchdown record wasn't going to be that hard to break. It clearly proved too much for him. But then you look at a lot of the successful quarterbacks in the NFL today, and if we were to make just slam cut judgments on all rookies, Trevor Lawrence, bust. Justin Fields, he's a bust. Trey Lance, probably a bust. Mac Jones is the only truly good quarterback in this class, and there's just too much talent there. To me, to lump Trevor Lawrence into the bust category is to be, honestly, it would just be to put the cart way before the horse. And so I think the same applies to Justin Fields, who at the very least, to my own eye test, showed to be much more accurate than a lot of statistics seem to suggest, just given the massive amount of miscommunications, especially early in the year, between Fields and his receivers. Yeah, those are going to get written down as terrible, terrible throws because the two guys ended up on different pages. But to get all this Fields tub thumping out of the way, Fields' development was the only thing that matters. He ended up with 10 to 11 games on the season, so he got quote-unquote enough experience. And now the real thing starts, right? Now the Bears get to pick a scheme that suits Fields' needs, and not the other way around necessarily, and kind of reset, which I think will do a lot of good for him because, to your point, this isn't the Emery to Pace handover where the Bears are handing nothing over. They're handing some pieces, maybe not as many as I think some people want to believe, but some pieces nevertheless. Jalen Johnson, Thomas Graham, even Eddie Jackson. There's 3 defensive backs, better than 1, that I think like Emery handed over. You've got Roquan Smith. Angelo Blackson proved himself. I mean, I could keep going if you wanted me to, but I think most Bears fans have a decent head on the different players that moving forward would probably be solid participants in a good Bears team. And so we'll see what happens. Crazier things have happened than a team in the Bears situation getting good soon, right? And at this point, it's just about finding the right coach to lead them forward, you know?
Yeah, no. And usually what happens on good teams is players develop better and faster. I mean, we saw that in 2018. I mean, there were guys like Adrian Amos and Nick Kwiatkowski that came out of nowhere that were replacement level starters at best for them, and all of a sudden they came out and they played really well. So you just never know. And it's the NFL is absolutely a year-to-year league. The Bears just have to get going in the right direction. Right now they're in the wrong direction. You wipe the slate clean, hopefully on tomorrow, and then you go from there, and you just hope that you can get back on the right track. And as long as you're on the right track, as long as you're not sitting there in mediocrity, as long as you're going in the right direction, I think that it'll be a lot easier to get through next season, even if they only win 8 or 9 games, 7, 8, 9 games. It'll be a lot easier to go through knowing that you have a coaching staff that is actually interested in developing players, that's actually interested in the overall progression of the team, not just playing veterans for the sake of playing veterans so you can save your job or attempt to save your job.
100%. Well, Aaron, that's it on the season. Anything coming up that we should be on the lookout for you? I know you talked about some head coach research.
No, because I don't even think I'm going to do I don't even think I'm going to be able to get around to doing any sort of really any sort of article or anything for. I think basically just watch my Twitter, I guess. I mean, that's an emotional mess anyway. So you could,
aren't we all?
Yeah, exactly. I think really more than anything, man. As most people who follow me know, I'm not going to source anything. I'm not going to pretend to know something I don't. I'm just going to give my overall raw thoughts on the situation, what I think they should do, and that's really about it, man. We're just going to, I think, for the most part, I think we're all just going to have to enjoy the roller coaster of the offseason together and know that it's going to be a lot more busy than we're used to over the last few years. There's going to be a lot of fun action going on, and just because a head coach gets named doesn't mean that we don't have assistants to look forward to. I think there's going to be a lot of action going on. It's going to be fun.
And you know what? Whatever happens, it's going to be way, way, way better. Last January, Aaron, to March or to May, forget the fact that we landed Justin Fields, because I remember what I felt like in February, and it was like, oh gosh, if we don't get Russell Wilson, what are we going to do? What on earth are the Bears going to do at quarterback? Are we going to have to watch Andy Dalton for an entire season? Are we going to draft? Are we going to draft Kellen Mond and act like we're excited about it? Or is Davis Mills the guy? And the head coaching thing is much more fun.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is.
And so, yeah, either way, that's the show, everybody. Thanks so much. Be on the lookout for, I have to imagine that we're going to have a whole bunch of Barely a Podcasts coming. Just a thought, where we'll be spinning up quick little things about whatever the Bears just did. But of course, you're going to get Bear and Balance tomorrow. You'll get Bears Banter later this week. Bears Over Beers will do something to ring in the new year. And the Staleys, our award presentation, will be coming up soon afterwards. We'll give everybody a little bit of time for the dust to settle. But either way, a lot coming up on the Windy City Gridiron podcasting channel. Thanks so much for listening. And until next time, bear down, and thanks so much for bearing with us. And we're clear. That was really solid. Okay. Thanks so much, Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, no, it was, I'm just, like, there's, like, a sense of relief. Like, I'm bummed because the season's over with, and obviously we don't get to wake up every Sunday and watch Bears football. But then at the same time, I'm also just like, it's finally over. We can finally stop speculating over the next few days what they're going to do. Oh, man, I'm ready.
So, as somebody who has to go through the game film every week and try to teach something about it, I completely lost my way over the last 3 weeks because, especially after the Baltimore game, what's the purpose of, like, further understanding Matt Nagy's scheme knowing he's gone? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, when we're just watching Mike Glennon get his teeth kicked in, or in this case, Andy Dalton's offense against the Vikings, what is the takeaway? I don't want to use the words "who cares." It's more like, why do you need to know? So You're saying I'm bummed the season's over. I'm not. Let's get going. Like, let's get to the point where they give us something that we can really dig into. Jim Harbaugh's hired. Let's turn on the 2011 San Francisco 49ers film, right? Yeah. Like, let's see what they did in 2013 on offense. What made them work? What made them tick? Like, there's so much that we get to do here during this time, right? New offensive coordinator. What's the new offense? Are we switching our defensive structure? 4-3, 3-4, still zone pattern match? Like, there's so much more to this than watching football games that mean truly nothing because the franchise quarterback isn't even playing. So I'm just straight up amped. Like, I'm very, very excited because
yeah, I am too, man. I'm ready. Like, I'm ready to just embrace. I mean, it's a crazy thing. It felt like the Bears were cycling through people left and right in terms of head coach, GM, and all that stuff. They haven't done it. I mean, we haven't seen them make a GM hire in 7 years, you know, or going on 8. We haven't seen them make a head coaching hire and going on 5 years, you know, or 4 years, whatever it is. You get the point. It's like
long time.
This is it's been a while. So there's going to be a lot of newness. There's going to even if you think about it, once they get, let's just say they hypothetically they hire a new GM. You know, we get into April with the draft. We don't know, you know, whatever GM it is, we don't know any of their tendencies. We don't know that they're going to, you know, do everything they can to trade up and do whatever. Like, we don't know what the tendencies are going to look like. So it's going to be a brand new learning process, which I think keeps things more interesting, especially within the offseason. You know, the roster building as a whole, what the tendencies are in free agency, everything. I think it's going to be a whole different feel on how they do everything, as you know, just in general. I think it's going to be. So. It's going to be a lot more fun. Yeah. Well, I'm hoping. Yeah. Because obviously I don't think a whole lot changes.
Look, I'm in that same place that most Bears fans get the third head coach around where they go, I don't believe in the McCaskies to figure it out. And like, that doesn't mean that I'm trying to be a naysayer. I'm trying to work past that and just wait for the results so that I don't have to say that out loud. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'll be honest. I'm expecting the worst just because, you know, as a Bears fan, you're kind of conditioned to. But I am excited to see the process and how it all pans out. Hopefully I'm wrong, you know?
I sure hope so, right? But either way, it's about 5. Let's cut this off so that I can get the podcast posted and we get to watch more football the rest of Sunday. I hope, by the way, okay, one last question. If you got to pick, do you want to see the Raiders and the Chargers play a real game, or do you want to just see them kneel for 3 hours? Because
I want to see the Chargers win. I hate the Raiders, man. Being from California, I hate the Raiders. So, like, you always feel bad for the Chargers because nobody ever cares about the Chargers. Like, I hate the Raiders, man. I hate them, and they're like on the level of the Dallas Cowboys for me. So I'm like, dude, I hope they lose. I hope they lose.
I'm unashamedly, what's the word? So there's this phenomena in the NHL. Do you follow hockey much?
A little bit.
Okay, so do you know how the point structure works?
Yeah.
So 2 points for a win, 1 for a tie, none for a loss. And if you lose in overtime, you get 1 point, but you still get 2 if you win in overtime. And so there's this phenomena that you see where if a game is 0-0, 1-1, 2-2 with about 8 minutes left, both teams, they're not going to say outright that they're playing for overtime, and plenty have given up a goal in that situation, but they're definitely being a little more defensive than offensive. And if they both go to overtime, then they get what they want, which is a point in the standings. I'm really curious to see. I'm not so silly as to think that the Raiders and the Chargers will actually trot out and start kneeling, right? That would take way too much trust. But around the 8-minute mark left in the fourth, if it's a 17-17 game, what do they do?
Well, especially if they get in overtime, because I'm sure you watched probably the end of that Pittsburgh game today. It's like there was a different sense of urgency for them, in that game, because it's like a tie does neither team any good in that situation. A tie, and they're both eliminated from the playoffs.
Oh my gosh!
In the Pittsburgh game.
Did I see Le'Veon Bell is the 90th player to catch a touchdown from Tom Brady? That is insane.
I completely forgot Le'Veon Bell was even.
I didn't remember.
I forgot he was still even in the league. Yeah. But I don't know. We'll see, dude.
We'll see.
Like I said, I hope the Chargers win. But there's a little part of me that's kind of glad that Indianapolis missed the playoffs. Just because it's like, that's what you get for trading away a first-round pick for Carson Wentz. So we'll see. I don't know. The Bears are out of it. Really, what it comes down to for me is, as long as the Packers don't make it to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl, I will probably be completely fine with whatever else happens.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. So
either way, now it's just a waiting game.
Exactly. Dude. Yeah. So I'm sure we'll be talking here in a little bit. I don't know. I got a few random notifications. I don't know if people are just asking me what I think is going to happen or whatever, but I'm interested to check out Twitter. So we'll see what happens.
Either way, we'll get to it. Let's
cool,
do
man.
it. Thanks so much for hanging out, Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely, dude.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon. And to everybody else, I'll see you on Wednesday. We're still breaking it down because that's just what we do here. Heck yeah. Go Lions. Like, Packers lose. Always fun. Did I see Jordan Love threw an interception at the very end of the game? Love to see that. But so, either way, until then, bear down. Thanks so much for bearing with me.